Good afternoon and welcome to Wintergreen Studios' virtual Land Art BioBlitz 2020. You have arrived at the session called Healing the Earth, Healing Ourselves with Kevin Fell. Thank you so much for being here and joining us. My name is Jess Pilo and I am the project coordinator at Wintergreen Studios. And with that, I will pass it off to our executive director, Rena Eupitis, who will introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Jess. And thank you, Jess, also for having the energy and the vision for making this virtual Land Art BioBlitz possible. I have to say that I was deeply disappointed when it became clear that the pandemic was going to make it impossible for us to meet in person. And one of my greatest disappointments was that Kevin would not be joining us on the land that we call Wintergreen. Kevin was with us as an artist in residence last year for the entire 5 days. I'm sure it felt more like 5 months. And we did an amazing amount of things. Kevin is a drummer, as many of you will know, so of course there was drumming. There was movement. There were morning gathering circles. There were land meditations. There were all kinds of magnificent activities. And in fact, I'm sure that most of you who are present at today's call have seen our website page. And it's no coincidence that on our website page, which I'm sharing with you right now, when you go to the events page, and we were looking for a spectacular photograph to describe the kind of work that happens at Wintergreen, we picked the photo of this man in this orange shirt calling us to drum. So this man in the orange shirt, I rang up a week or two ago and I said, Kevin, what are we going to do? And Kevin and I talked for half an hour, talked about how much we'd missed each other, and almost hung up saying, we can't do this because you can't drum to your computer. And in fact, you can't drum to your computer and do the same thing. I'm struggling with many activities that I'm finding impossible to do during this time. But what Kevin does through his drumming is perhaps more significant than the drum itself. In his bio, we read that Kevin is a passionate advocate of social justice and a highly experienced artist educator. I know this of Kevin. And in a week when George Floyd has been murdered and atrocities in Canada and around the world have been shared in ways that make my heart weep, I can't think of a better time to have Kevin as a panelist for the Land Art BioBlitz. The programs that he offers are tools for personal and societal growth. Kevin began his career in South Africa, where he graduated from Rose University, and he has worked since then in many schools, in universities where I first met him at Queen's, with school boards, with NGOs, with theater companies, with corporations, to help facilitate learning, personal and professional growth. He doesn't say in his bio that he was in the introductory lead band or whatever you call those, what do you call, there's a special name for the people who introduce the main speaker. Kevin did that for many years for Nelson Mandela. Kevin makes me courageous. It was a conversation I had in the woods with him at Wintergreen that gave me the courage to do work in Saudi Arabia. So I know I didn't stick to my script, but that's my introduction to Kevin Fell. Kevin, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Rena. It's wonderful to see everybody here online. Thank you for the introduction. It's great to see so many South Africans joining us who wouldn't be at Wintergreen Studios otherwise. So it's a true privilege to be a part of the virtual Land Art BioBlitz, which, like Rena said, it's the first time. And I believe it's going to continue. Rena mentioned in her opening this morning that the event that we usually have on the land at Wintergreen Studios will become one which will be shared virtually each year too. So for those of you who are joining on Wintergreen's event for the first time, we hope to see you at many, many more in the future. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you to Rena. Thank you to Monica, who's worked really hard to make this happen over the last few years. And of course, Jess for putting all of this together. I really, really appreciate the encouragement and the support and the inspiration. So what I wanted this session to be today really was a chance for us to be in community. So the next 40 minutes or so, really what I wanted to do is give you some context as to where this conversation came from and what, and then have a little a conversation with each other about how we're experiencing life through these times, and then also offer some personal development frameworks for perhaps making sense of some of the feelings and the thoughts that you may be experiencing in your life. So these are balancing activities. So I wanted to begin by saying that when I was artist in residence at Wintergreen Studios last year, I ran a session called Earth, My Body. And like Rena said, it was really a chance for everybody to celebrate the elements, to be in nature, and to really celebrate earth and air and fire and water as ways of balancing our energy and coming into wellness. And then the activities were designed to try and get us to practice listening and responding to each other as a part of a group. So when I was invited back to the BioBlitz this year, I decided to focus on an extension of that work. And I was interested that the word listen and the word silent are made from the same letters. The idea being that we really can't listen until we stop and are silent in some way. And so I had put forward to Wintergreen this idea that we'd have a more reflective session, a chance to bring people to a slower way of being, to stop and to be silent in nature and to listen. I didn't think that the whole world was going to stop and we would all be in some ways forced to slow down, and that maybe we would be collectively around the world listening more intently to what we're being told or what we're feeling or the state that we're in and we've created for ourselves. So the idea is to arrive at a place of essential silence and conscious listening. So what I'd like to do before we start our conversation around how we're experiencing life at the moment is really just to invite everybody to put your 2 feet on the ground and take a deep, deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And imagine that you're sitting on a bench, a rough hewn bench that's made from a tree trunk that's been cut with a plank on top of it. And you're sitting on this bench in the middle of a field. You can hear the birds around you. You can smell the smudge being carried on the breeze. You can hear birds. There's lots of bugs. If we're at Wintergreen right now, we need to have this on. This is something that I had on last year around my neck. Every now and then I had to pull it up like this over my head to stop all the mosquitoes from attacking us while we were drumming. And I invited you to just take this moment to center yourself using your breath. So smudging is a practice, an American Native practice that's been used as a form of spiritual cleansing. And I have in the resource package put an article about smudging because it's quite interesting, the science behind how sage, which I'm using can really clean the air somewhere. But what I like about smudging as a way of sort of coming into a more reflective space is that it's plant medicine. So I get to connect with plants that have been grown on this landscape. And in doing so, I also connect with this culture, indigenous culture. And it became a doorway for me into learning more about indigenous culture and the first people of this land, where Wintergreen is situated and where I'm talking to you from now. So if you're interested in smudging as a way to bring your attention inwards, there's an article that you can take a look at. So one of the things I'd like to offer you, I'm going to share my screen right now, is just some questions about how your life may have changed this year. And I think this is a great conversation to have, being that we're all in different parts of the world, and this pandemic and what's going on around the world might be affecting you right now. What are you doing more of that you like, or that perhaps you dislike? And how are your relationships changing in regards to your career, possibly? And I know this has been a very challenging time for many people, financially and in their career. How are your relationships changing in regards to your family? Maybe your car, maybe you're not in your car so much. How has your relationship changed with your home or the natural world? Are you getting out more? Are you in your garden? How has your relationship changed with the governing system of wherever it is that you're living? How has this space changed for your personal and for your own spiritual growth? So in what ways do you not just think, but really feel the events of this extraordinary time impacting you? My brother-in-law, who's in England, he said, you know, this is what we call the corona coaster. There's just such a range of emotions, and one day you feel great and you're happy to have more space and time possibly, and the next day everything comes crashing in on you and you just wish that things were as they were before. And I think change often feels uncomfortable and gritty like that. What intentions do you keep at the moment that are guiding your actions? Perhaps your intentions are a little different than they were a few months ago. And what actions might you take to reshape your life? So before we kind of have an opportunity to open up the microphone and for each of us to kind of share maybe something, a response to some of these questions or reflective questions, what I found really interesting in the last while is all these articles about how the earth is responding to our change in behavior. You know, the pandemic hit and immediately we were asked to go home and stay home. And a lot of us stopped driving. And we started to see that the skies above large cities were clearing. You know, people can see Mount Everest from further away than they've ever been able to in the last 100 years. Cities that had been so choked up with smog have started to clear. And I found this really interesting. On a personal level, I found the fact that our food security was questioned, and in some places in the world really have been really impacted. Interesting, my relationship to food and where my food comes from and how available it is to me. My relationship to the garden and wanting to be outside more and plant. So I put together a collection of articles that I have found interesting over this time, mostly from the BBC, because that's where I've been doing a lot of my reading. And looking at how these times have been able to create a new opportunity possibly for our relationship with nature. And one of the things that kind of excited me was the second article here, Climate Change, How a Green New Deal Really Could Go Global, was the idea that with all this money that governments will be spending to restart economies, and in Europe they're talking about 2 trillion euros, putting that money into green initiatives, that if they're going to boost the economy, that they can do it by spending money on green initiatives. So this article, and I quote, it says, the idea is to turbocharge the European effort to reduce carbon emissions to net zero by 2050. And the scale of what's being proposed is mind-boggling. 2 trillion euro, the European Commission says it will be wielding to try and bring about the biggest green stimulus package in history. That to me is very, very exciting. Then there's other articles, like the next one listed there, the extinction crisis, talking about how we're in the 6th mass extinction of the world. Evidence that the world's undergoing a 6th mass extinction, and that species are disappearing at a rate 100 times the natural rate. And that unlike other mass extinctions, these aren't being caused by volcanoes or asteroid collisions, but by our own action through ourselves, causing ecosystems to face collapse. It's kind of depressing and can be very overwhelming. There's other articles that are, looking at top 10 tips, ways that we can reduce our own carbon footprint. And what I found so interesting was prior to this time, when people have spoken about getting out of your car, getting into cycling and walking, it just seemed like, was that ever going to happen? At least where I'm living in Canada and in Toronto. And then in a very short space of time, a lot of these things started to happen. People were staying home, out of their cars, and they're walking and they're riding. And, these are things we've been talking about in terms of making a difference on the environment. And people that I've been speaking with in various, forums have been saying, well, how many of these new behaviors are going to stick around? When all this is done, we're just going to go back to driving our cars and back to, as if these things were out of our control. But I really don't believe that they are. I don't believe that what we choose to do next is out of our control. I believe that taking this time to reflect and make choices at a personal level can really steer our way forward on a societal level. And where I come at this conversation, the angle that I come at it with is the idea that if we're doing our own personal development work, being reflective and turning our reflections into actions, into actionable choices moving forward, and we share that in community with other people. If we share our personal development work in community with other people, then we start to see things change at a societal level. That's my belief. And the work that I've been doing in the last decade with Hoza, my organization, the word Hoza means change. It means stop what you're doing, start doing something else, and change. So I offer the idea that by sharing our experiences and how we're living right now, it might free someone up to give themselves permission to stop doing something that they've been doing. And that in itself brings about personal change and a societal change. Or to embrace a new form of behavior for yourself, which again brings about this change in your own personal life and in the greater society. So I really think that seeing how the earth is responding to our changing behavior is a wonderful and powerful message to me that I'm not powerless and that these things are not out of my control, that I can make sense of what's happening and make choices based on that. So I'm going to stop talking now. I know I've been talking a lot. What I'd like to do is really offer the chance for people to share with each other, one another, about how your life may have changed, or how you're finding, if you want to call it lockdown, or some of the I guess things that we're experiencing right now, with everything that is going on with the coronavirus, and possibly also with governance and some of the racial tensions we've been experiencing, because I think everything that's happening is having an impact on us. So what I'm curious about is, from my own personal point of view, is I really enjoyed the opportunity to go out and go for walks and connect with the nature around my own neighborhood. And I guess I feel over having done it now for every day for the last few months, it's not just been something that I've enjoyed, it's sort of become a really important priority in my own health and well-being, and something that I would prioritize more highly as I move forward. So there's an example, of how I found things changing and this year. And what I really haven't liked is not having any personal contact, like how important it is to be in community, and the energies that we share are very tangible energies. And if you're me, I like to hug and touch too. So, that's a big part of my well-being.
Kevin, I'm just going to jump in here. I think of all the things that I've missed the most, it's those casual encounters with people where you see someone on the street and you're able to walk up to them and give them a hug and ask them how they are. I can't believe that that's the sort of thing that I once took for granted. I will never take that for granted again. And I know that. I hope that some of the habits I've developed I'll keep. Not so sure about that, but I'm positive that I will never take for granted the human touch. And I see now that there's a raised hand.
Well, great to speak to you, and great to be able to see you, and wonderful to be a part of this conversation. I would just like to say that the one thing I have found out of this is I heard a UK doctor say the most contagious thing in the world is fear. And what I have experienced and seen in South Africa is an enormous amount of fear, especially among children. And as you know, my work involves children, and we are going to have to re-educate children and really help children to move forward into a world that does not have fear and does have social contact. So to me, that's really been very sad.
Yeah, and I think commenting on that is, I've been thinking a lot about how, as an adult, you have a lot of strategies for your own mental health and well-being. And I have 3 children, and seeing them go through this kind of experience, knowing that they don't have the kinds of mental health strategies that possibly I have as an adult. And so how important it is for them to be exposed to those and to teach those, and for them to learn those, so that they can take care of themselves, in a time that's difficult for them. Something else that I find interesting is how especially the coronavirus impacts elder people. And that's really brought up the question for me of elders, and how our society regards elders, and the keeping of knowledge and the passing down of knowledge, and what our roles are personally in imparting knowledge to younger people, and also societally in terms of taking care of our elders. And I think one of the things that I have found disturbing and exciting about this time is to see how the neglect of elders has been very disturbing, but also how people have perhaps taken a moment to pause and reflect on the fact that elders aren't being taken care of well in our society. And also, it's devastating to any society when you lose a disproportionate part of your population. So I remember being in Cambodia, and also being in Mozambique that had both experienced civil war, or in Cambodia, genocide. And anyone over the age of 40 mostly had been killed, either through civil war, through genocide, because they couldn't get the food, they couldn't move around, they weren't as mobile as the younger people, they weren't able to defend themselves as easily, perhaps. So you had these societies where there were great gaps in knowledge. So they had lost so much of their cultural knowledge, and so many of their stories and a lot of the knowledge from the elders hadn't been passed down. So with everything that's going on right now too, I think one of my own personal reflections is to really think of the elders, and also think about, as I move through my life, what my duties and obligations as an elder are or will be.
Kevin, I'm going to take this opportunity to comment on one of your questions that came as a resource with this workshop. And that's this notion of the Corona coaster. Is that what it's called, that your mother-in-law talked about, the Corona coaster? I've seen that in other spots as well. I have to say that I have had some of the most fulfilling days since we've been in so-called lockdown, and also some of the most dreary days. And I can't say that what I would say is that the amplitude of the wave is greater, that the highs are higher and the lows are lower. I always have highs and lows, but these ones are massive in terms of the amplitude and unpredictable. Before we were in this place, I could usually tell if I was about to have a really wonderful day, and I could equally tell if things were going a bit south that week. Now I'm finding, particularly on the days that are hard, they just come from nowhere. All of a sudden, it's one of those days where I think, man, I just have to get through this and press reset and start again tomorrow. So I'd be curious to know if other people who are on this call have experienced that with the Corona coaster, the amplitude of the wave, the nature of those feelings. And I don't know how it's going to impact me in the long term. I just know that in the short term, just get through the day when it's a rough one.
Thanks, Rena. So I'm gonna invite people to chime in, to continue to chime in as we go along. But what I'd like to offer right now is just some personal development frameworks for making sense of perhaps some of the things that we're talking about, like the Corona coaster. I see Wes is saying try to take lots of walks outside. So I think Wes, the challenge when coming to even to do this workshop was to say that really when we were at Wintergreen, we were taking advantage of the earth and of nature, and we still can all the time. But that was what really centered us and allowed us to start having conversations and talking about our lives and where we wanted to go. What I want to do right now is, besides from encourage people who can get outside to be outside, and I know if you're in South Africa, your window to go outside is really, really short. And surfers have been arrested, and people have been arrested for doing things that we just take for granted. And those are very balancing things. But I want to give you some frameworks for your own personal development that are also balancing activities, which, like I said, when you're working through them as tools, I believe help with the societal development and helping us make choices as we move forward. So the first one I want to share with you is one that Maureen Fell, who is on the call, had shared with me a long time ago. And hopefully everyone can see that they're the fulfilling puzzle of life. But this is a tool that I've been using now for years, and I love it because in this time when I've been reflecting on, my life, it's a chance to, what you can do is take this printout, and there's a PDF in your package that you can print, and you can use this tool. Take a colored pencil, and just from your gut, just intuitively color in each little puzzle piece. If you feel like your family life is really rich and full, and a lot of your energy gets spent in your family life, you could fill fill in the whole piece. Perhaps right now, your friends, the time you spend with your friends, or the energy that you spend with your friendships has waned. Maybe you're going to color in a very small part of that puzzle piece. Or it could be the opposite for you. So this is an intuitive exercise for you to take a colored pen or pencil and color in these different areas, and it becomes an energy map. Where are you spending the majority of your energy? How balanced is your life? And I like the idea that if each one of these areas had a pillar extending upwards, holding up a roof, holding up your life, then if all those areas are quite full and well balanced, you have lots of pillars holding up the various parts of your life. If you lose your job, your career, as many people have right now, the whole life doesn't come crashing down. The whole roof doesn't collapse, because you have many other pillars in your life keeping you balanced, keeping you sustained. Whereas if the only puzzle piece is career, that's the only one you've been able to fill in because all your energy is in your career and you're not spending any time in any other part of your life, when you lose that job, it becomes devastating for you. Absolutely devastating. So the way I've used this personal development tool is as a check-in for myself. And every now and then, usually about once a year or so, I will do this activity and I'll get a sense of where am I spending my energy, and where there are places that I'm not able to, which are lacking, let's say alone time. I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I have 3 kids, I have a job, I'm busy, don't have a lot of time to spend alone. That's a chance for me to think, well, perhaps if I were to spend more alone time, what would I do? And I think this is where it starts to become interesting, because we start to come up with actionable items. I'm going to let go of something, I'm going to stop doing something to make more time, more alone time for myself. And as it turns out, like Wes, I've been walking more, I've been spending more time outdoors. I'm going to start pursuing more alone time outdoors. And if you're not in Canada, you might decide you want to try and get to Wintergreen at some point. So you're going to find beautiful places and go and connect with those places. But the trick is to try and think of actionable items that you can follow up on. So this gives you a sense of where your life is, where you're spending your energy, and perhaps where you want to spend more of your energy, so that you're crafting your life. You're in control of where you're spending your time and what you're doing. So having worked with this for a while, this framework, I, in conversation with other people, started to take it in another direction. And I wanted to share with you this framework, Balancing the Wheel. And what I've done is take the same puzzle, but I've put it into a different structure. And if you look, in the center is intention. And the idea is that pay attention to intention. That every pattern, and I'm a drummer, so I love patterns. Every pattern has a core, which repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats. And we see this in nature too. When we look at flowers and birds, we see these patterns that are repeated. So to pay attention to your core intention, I believe that's, if we're paying attention, those things flow through all the different areas of our life. And again, in a very similar way, you can take a look at this and you could color in different parts of this balancing wheel. And if we do that, we end up with a really interesting picture. And I'd like to show you one that I've done here. So you might get something that looks a little bit like this. Now, if you picture this in motion as a wheel, you can imagine that you're going to have a pretty wobbly ride, because this wheel is not round. You know, you have a huge amount of energy being spent in your career, and the other areas vary. So what started to interest me was the thought that perhaps to feel really balanced and to feel really fulfilled and healthy, it's a matter of not necessarily trying to fill each segment of this pie to capacity, but rather trying to balance them so that you get a nice even edge so that you roll along and you get that sense of flow and balance in your life, moving with intention through the various parts of your life in balance between family time and career, and spiritual growth, playtime, time with friends, society. So I'm going to leave it there, but I just wanted to offer these things to people who, at this time, when we see the earth responding in so many different ways to our behavior, to perhaps take a moment to pause and think about our lives and do some personal growth work and to share it with other people so that our personal development becomes a part of this societal development, and not feel so overwhelmed and helpless, but know that we do have some control over the choices going forward, and we can craft that future. So I wanted to so I'm going to leave it there and see if there's any questions or comments that anyone wanted to make before we wrap up.
This is a strangely silent group, Kevin. I think you've given us a lot to think about. I love that wheel, and what's striking to me is how little it takes for it to be unbalanced. Mm-hmm. One of those areas, if there's too much attention given, means the whole wheel is flipping around in a way that we don't want it to. And I want to be sure that people know where to find all of these resources on our website. So if you'll let me do that for the last couple of minutes, I'll just share my screen this time. So if you go to wintergreenstudios.com, the website, not the place, and go to events and see Kevin. There's the buff he's wearing to keep the bugs away, but there's no bugs in your house. We have brand new ones this year, beautiful red ones. You'll have to wait till next year. Go to the Virtual Land Art BioBlitz page, and then all of you have already found the schedule here, but if you keep scrolling down, you'll see a section that says pre-recorded videos and other resources. So there's a number of video recordings there, and Kevin's is right here, Healing the Earth, Healing Ourselves. And that beautiful image is of the children in the meadow last year when Kevin was leading us in a morning meditation. So this is the resource that we've seen on Kevin's screen. There's those children again, and there's the wheel and the wobbly ride that we've just heard Kevin talk about. So I'm going to go back to myself here, and I see there's a couple of questions that I'd like to just give Kevin a chance to answer. So one of the questions is, how would you balance your career with everything else in your life if you work 9 to 5, 5 days a week without losing out an income? How would you balance?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a real challenge. I mean, I think, so I have my own business, Hoza Creative Mediation, as an artist educator, and trying to balance that along with family and other commitments it's an ongoing struggle. But I think my answer would be consciously. It's about working towards what you want, and I think if you're doing it consciously, opportunities present, and you find ways to establish boundaries so that you know that when you're contributing to your career, it's within the boundary that you've set. Mm-hmm. And it can be very hard sometimes to manage a boundary when you're having to, I say, educate someone else, whether it's your boss or a colleague. And I give you an example. I don't answer text messages and emails during the weekend after, or when I'm not in office hours, because that gave me a chance to just not be working. And I educated people to not expect a response right away. Mm-hmm. And, not everyone's going to like that, but that's a boundary that I set up to create space for myself.
And it means that people know what to expect. I think managing expectations is part of that boundary setting. And if they know, they know. And I know that it's 5 to 2. And I know that if I don't stop now, even though the conversation is just getting going with our attendees, I'll have Jess to answer to. So Jess is quickly setting up our next session with the Frontenac Arch. I want to thank you, Kevin, for your patience and grace and for these beautiful tools that you've given us to take home and think about. I'm getting out my crayons at the end of the day. So thank you, Kevin. Thank you to the attendees. Bye for now.
Thank you, everybody.